All right, everyone, we are getting into chapter 3, which is the tissue level of organization in the human body. So for this chapter, we are going to talk about the main types of tissues and their roles in the body. We're going to talk about some different types of tissue membranes and how they function. And then we're going to look a little bit more in detail about the 4 tissue types. Some of these we'll revisit in later chapters, like the epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. We'll look again later on in the semester, but we are going to be talking quite a bit about connective tissues this week, since we don't really discuss those in any other sections. Alright, so this video is just covering section 2 of this chapter, which is the different types of tissues. So we'll briefly touch on the 4 types and their functions and structures, and we'll cover a little bit of the embryonic origin, so how they start out in embryos and those germ layers, and then talk about the tissue membranes. Alright. So tissues are similar cells that are found together within the body. So the cells that make that tissue are going to share a common embryonic origin. So they're going to start out in the same type of embryonic stem cell tissue. These cells are also going to share morphological features. Morphology is their appearance. So the cells within that tissue are going to look similar. And then they're also going to be arranged in a particular pattern that helps with the function of whatever that tissue is. So we have 4 general categories of tissues. These are epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So this is just showing some examples of what is included in each of those 4 tissue types. So nervous system tissue is the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. We have 3 types of muscle tissue: cardiac, smooth, and skeletal muscle. We've got some different types of epithelial, so these are going to line the GI tract, so the digestive system and other hollow organs, as well as the skin surface. So our skin is a type of epithelial tissue. And then last but not least, our connective tissues. This includes a lot of different things. So fat and other types of soft padding tissues are part of this group. And then bone and tendon, as well as some other more unique ones that we'll get into in a different video. All right, so in the embryonic stage, so when we all start out as embryos, we talked a little bit last week about some different layers and stem cell types, the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm layers. And again, each of these layers is going to give rise to or produce different types of tissues in the body. So that ectoderm layer is going to result in the epidermis or skin, glands on the skin, some of our cranial bones, so the bones in our skulls, just some of those, the pituitary gland and adrenal medulla, the nervous system, and the mouth that's between the cheek and gums. So the cheek and gums are not coming from this ectoderm layer, and then the anus also is going to come from that ectoderm layer. The mesoderm is going to end us giving us proper connective tissues, which we'll get into in another video: bone, cartilage, blood, the endothelium of blood vessels, so the inner lining of those blood vessels, muscle tissue, synovial membranes, we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit, as well as serous membranes that line body cavities, and then the kidneys and lining of the gonads, which are going to be the testes and ovaries. And last but not least, the endoderm germ layer is going to give us the lining of airways and digestive system, except for the mouth and the very distal part of the digestive system, which are the rectum and anal canal. And then this is also going to give us certain types of glands, primarily associated with the digestive system, and most of our endocrine glands, and then the adrenal cortex. We do have 2 layers of those adrenal glands. Now let's talk about tissue membranes. So a tissue membrane is a thin layer of cells or a sheet of cells that can cover the outside of the body, like our skin, The organs, so an example of this would be pericardium that surrounds the heart, the internal passageways that lead outside of the body, like the digestive tract, and then also the lining of movable joint cavities. So we'll talk a lot more about joints another week, but we are going to cover the tissue membranes of joint cavities today. And so we have two basic types of tissue membranes, the epithelial membranes and then connective tissue membranes. So epithelial membranes are going to attach to a deeper layer of connective tissue, and we have three categories of epithelial membranes: the mucous membranes, serous membranes, and cutaneous membrane. So mucous membranes are epithelial tissue that lines body cavities and hollow passageways that open to the external environment. So body cavities would be like what contains all of our digestive organs, so we are going to have a mucous membrane lining there, as well as those hollow passageways like the inside of our digestive system. Mucous membranes also include things like the mouth, nose, and eyes are very common mucous membranes. Serous membranes are going to line cavities that do not open to the outside of the body, and they're also going to cover the organs located within those cavities. So we talked a little bit about serous cavities during week 1, the pleural cavity, pericardial cavity, and then we also have the peritoneum. So if you remember, we talked about how these are kind of like balloons where we have different layers, parietal and visceral layers of those, and that applies to all three of these different cavities. So the pleural cavity is going to surround the lungs, so we have one layer of that membrane that's going to sit right on the surface of the lungs, and then the other layer is going to be a little bit further out with some fluid in between those two layers. Same idea with the pericardium or pericardial cavity. Again, that surrounds the heart. And then the peritoneum is going to surround all of the organs of our digestive system in that abdominal region. And then our third type of epithelial membrane is cutaneous membranes, and this is going to include the skin and then other stratified squamous epithelial membranes that rests on top of connective tissue, and we'll talk a little bit later about what stratified squamous means. That's going to be in the epithelial section of the tissue types. Connective tissue membranes are made solely out of connective tissues, as the name suggests. These are going to encapsulate or contain organs like the kidneys, as well as lining the movable joints, and that is going to be a synovial membrane specifically, and so those line the cavities of freely movable joints. A freely movable joint would be something like the shoulder or the hip. So we have a lot of movement, ranges of motion that we can go through in those particular joints. All right, so just some examples of these different things. So mucous membranes, again, digestive, respiratory, urinary, reproductive tracts, so eyes, nose, mouth, and a lot of other things. So that eyes, nose, and mouth is part of digestive and respiratory system. The urethra that comes out of the bladder is a mucous membrane that lines that. And a bunch of other areas. Serous membranes are going to, again, line body cavities close to the external environment, so peritoneal cavity, pleural cavity, and pericardial cavities. And then cutaneous membranes are the skin, covers our body surfaces, and then we've got synovial membranes in our joints, multiple types of joints, shoulders, elbows, knees, hips, and some other ones we'll talk about more when we do our articulations chapter. And that wraps up this first video. In the next video, we will talk a little bit more in depth about epithelial tissues.